Sophia Turner had always felt like an outsider in the sprawling, sun-soaked city of Los Angeles. The glitz and glamour that defined LA seemed to mock her from billboards and glossy magazine covers. A world she longed to be part of but never quite reached. At 26, Sophia worked as a junior stylist at a mid-tier fashion boutique, where her days were spent arranging mannequins and folding silk blouses for clients who barely glanced in her direction. Her small studio apartment in Silver Lake was a stark contrast to the opulent mansions perched on the hillsides, a cramped space with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet that dripped incessantly during rainstorms. It wasn't until the night of the gallery opening that everything changed. Held at a trendy art space downtown, the event buzzed with creative energy. Painters mingling with photographers, models sipping champagne, and entrepreneurs pitching their next big idea. Sophia had attended reluctantly, dragged along by her coworker Mia, but it turned out to be the kind of evening she'd later describe as fate, or so she thought at the time. That's when she met Darius Carter. Tall and unassuming, Darius stood near the bar, scrolling through his phone while occasionally glancing up to observe the crowd. He wasn't flashy or loud. Instead, there was something quiet and magnetic about him, a calm presence amid the chaos. When their eyes met across the room, Sophia felt an inexplicable pull, as though some invisible thread had drawn them together. They struck up a conversation after he complimented her earrings, simple gold hoops, nothing extravagant, and soon discovered they shared a mutual love for black and white photography. Darius explained that he worked as a freelance photographer, capturing portraits and landscapes for local magazines. While his career wasn't glamorous, he spoke with such passion about his craft that Sophia found herself captivated. For the first time in years, someone looked at her not as a cog in the machine of LA's superficial social scene, but as a person worth knowing. By the end of the night, they exchanged numbers, and Sophia walked home under the pale glow of streetlights, her heart fluttering with possibility. Their relationship blossomed quickly. Darius showered Sophia with attention, sending her thoughtful texts throughout the day, and surprising her with little gifts, a latte from her favorite cafe, a framed photo of her smiling at the gallery, a handwritten note tucked into her purse. Every gesture made her feel cherished, as if she were finally stepping into the life she'd always dreamed of. For once, she believed she'd found someone who truly saw her. But beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect romance, cracks began to form. Early on, Sophia noticed how Darius grew tense whenever she talked to other men, even casually. Once, at a dinner party, he shot her a sharp look when she laughed too loudly at a joke told by one of her colleagues. Later, he apologized profusely, saying he just didn't want to lose her. She brushed it off, chalking it up to insecurity. After all, no one had ever cared for her this much before. How could she fault him for loving her too deeply? As weeks turned into months, Sophia started comparing their modest lifestyle to the lavish lives of her friends. Social media feeds filled with designer handbags, exotic vacations, and candlelit dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants only fueled her growing dissatisfaction. Darius worked hard, but his income barely covered rent and groceries, let alone the luxuries Sophia craved. Still, she told herself it didn't matter. Love, she reasoned, was supposed to conquer all. What Sophia failed to see was that her discontent was already seeping into the foundation of their relationship, weakening it brick by brick. And while she basked in the warmth of Darius's affection, she remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface, a storm that would soon shatter the illusion of perfection she'd built around them. As the initial glow of romance began to fade, Sophia found herself increasingly restless. The once enchanting simplicity of Darius's life now felt suffocating, like a pair of shoes that were comfortable at first, but had begun to pinch with every step. She tried to ignore the gnawing sense of discontent, telling herself she was being ungrateful. After all, Darius loved her deeply, something she couldn't say about most men she'd dated before him. Yet, no matter how hard she tried to suppress it, Her desire for something more kept bubbling to the surface. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly. Over coffee one morning, Sophia casually mentioned how much easier life would be if they could afford a nicer apartment, one with a view of the city rather than the grimy alley behind hers. Darius smiled weakly and changed the subject, but Sophia noticed the flicker of unease in his eyes. A few days later, she offhandedly remarked on how exhausting it was to take the bus to work, when so many of her colleagues drove sleek Audis or BMWs. This time, Darius didn't smile. Instead, he clenched his jaw and muttered something about budgeting priorities. The tension between them grew thicker with each passing week. Sophia's comments became less casual and more pointed, often delivered with an edge of frustration. "You know, Mia's boyfriend just got her a Louis Vuitton bag for her birthday," she said one evening while scrolling through Instagram. "Not that I care about stuff like that. But wouldn't it be nice to splurge once in a while?" Darius stared at her, his expression unreadable. For someone who prided himself on providing for the people he cared about, these remarks cut deeper than Sophia realized. What Sophia failed to understand was that Darius's pride was fragile, held together by threads of insecurity. Unlike her friends' partners who seemed effortlessly successful, Darius worked tirelessly for modest paychecks, scraping together enough to keep them afloat. Each criticism Sophia lobbed at their lifestyle chipped away at his self-worth, leaving him feeling inadequate and exposed. He began working longer hours, taking on extra freelance gigs in hopes of earning more money to please her. But the harder he worked, the more distant he became, retreating into himself as stress consumed him. One particularly heated argument marked a turning point. It happened after Sophia brought up the idea of moving to New York, a dream she'd nurtured since college. She painted a vivid picture of Manhattan penthouses, high-profile fashion events, and networking opportunities that could catapult her career to new heights. Darius listened silently at first, his face growing paler with each word. Then, abruptly, he snapped. "Do you even hear yourself?" he demanded, his voice trembling with anger. "We can barely afford rent here and you're talking about New York? What do you think this is? A fairy tale where I suddenly become rich overnight?" Sophia recoiled, stunned by the venom in his tone. Before she could respond, Darius stormed into the kitchen and hurled a glass against the wall. The shattering sound echoed through the tiny apartment, leaving both of them frozen, in shock. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Darius slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered hoarsely. "I didn't mean to. The apology came too late. Something inside Sophia shifted that night. She told herself the outburst was a fluke, a momentary lapse brought on by stress. But deep down, she couldn't shake the image of Darius's fury, or the realization that beneath his calm exterior lay a volatile streak she hadn't fully understood. Still, Sophia convinced herself it wasn't worth worrying about. Everyone had bad days, right? And besides, Darius always made up for his mistakes with sweet gestures afterward. Flowers left on her pillow, handwritten notes tucked into her bag, promises to do better. Each act of contrition reassured her that things would go back to normal, that their relationship could weather any storm. What Sophia didn't realize was that the cracks weren't just superficial. They ran deep, threatening to fracture everything they'd built together. Worse still, her dissatisfaction continued to fester, feeding into a cycle of resentment that neither of them knew how to break. As the months wore on, the balance of power in their relationship began to shift, setting the stage for darker days ahead. The aftermath of the glass-shattering incident lingered like a shadow over their apartment, casting an uneasy pallor on every interaction. Darius's apology had been sincere, or at least it seemed that way, but Sophia couldn't ignore the tremor in his voice when he promised never to lose control again. For days, they tiptoed around each other, speaking only in careful, measured tones, as though afraid to disturb the fragile peace. Yet beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. The dynamic between them was no longer one of equals. Instead, it tilted precariously toward imbalance. Sophia found herself walking on eggshells at first, wary of provoking another outburst. But as time passed and life returned to its usual rhythm, she began to notice how differently Darius behaved. He became hypervigilant, scrutinizing her actions and questioning her motives. If she stayed late at work, he'd call repeatedly, his tone growing increasingly agitated if she didn't answer immediately. When she went out with Mia or other friends, he insisted on knowing where she was, who she was with, and when she'd be home. At first, she tried to rationalize his behavior as concern born from love, but soon, it felt more like control. What frightened Sophia most wasn't just Darius's possessiveness. It was how easily she adapted to it. She started altering her own behavior to avoid triggering him, texting updates during nights out, skipping social events altogether, even downplaying casual conversations with male coworkers. And yet, despite these concessions, the tension between them continued to simmer, ready to boil over at the slightest provocation. But what Sophia failed to recognize, or perhaps chose not to admit, was that she too was changing. Her frustration with their stagnant lifestyle morphed into resentment, which she began channeling into subtle manipulations. It started innocuously enough, dropping hints about expensive gifts she admired, exaggerating stories about her friends' luxurious vacations, or sighing wistfully while flipping through catalogs for designer furniture. Each comment was calculated to remind Darius of what he couldn't give her, planting seeds of guilt that would later bear bitter fruit. Darius, desperate to prove himself and salvage their relationship, threw himself into work with renewed intensity. He took on risky freelance projects, some offering quick cash but little stability. When those payments came in, he handed over chunks of money without hesitation, hoping to fill the void he sensed widening between them. But no amount of material compensation could mend the fissures in their bond. Instead, it only deepened his financial strain, pushing him further into a spiral of anxiety and self-doubt. One evening, after weeks of mounting pressure, Sophia made a bold move. Sitting across from Darius at their cluttered kitchen table, she slid a stack of credit card bills toward him. "I need help," she said softly, her voice tinged with desperation. "I can't keep up with this alone." Darius stared at the numbers, his face pale. "Where did all this come from?" he asked, his voice strained. "I don't know," Sophia replied, avoiding his gaze. "It just adds up. You know how hard it is to get ahead here." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in before adding, "If we're going to make things work, I need you to step up." For a moment, Darius looked as though he might argue, but then his shoulders sagged in defeat. He nodded mutely, signing checks and transferring funds until the debt was temporarily covered. As he did so, Sophia felt a strange mix of triumph and guilt. She knew she was exploiting his vulnerabilities, yet she justified it by telling herself she deserved better. After everything she'd sacrificed for their relationship, wasn't it fair to demand more? What neither of them realized was that their toxic dance of manipulation and appeasement was creating a cycle impossible to break. Every concession Darius made fueled Sophia's dissatisfaction, while every critique Sophia leveled at him chipped away at his already fragile sense of self-worth. Their once loving connection devolved into a transactional exchange, where affection was traded for material comforts and forgiveness came at a steep emotional cost. By the end of the year, their lives were unrecognizable. Darius worked tirelessly, sacrificing sleep and sanity to meet Sophia's escalating demands. Meanwhile, Sophia grew colder, her initial guilt giving way to a hardened resolve. She told herself she was doing what was necessary to survive in a world that demanded more than Darius could provide. Yet deep down, a small part of her wondered whether she'd gone too far, if the cracks in their foundation had widened beyond repair. And still, neither of them saw the breaking point looming. Just ahead, waiting to shatter whatever remained of their fractured. The breaking point came on a cold, rainy night in February, a night that would forever be etched into Sophia's memory. It wasn't the first fight they'd had, nor was it the worst in terms of volume or intensity. But this time, something inside Sophia snapped. For months, she had convinced herself that she could endure the tension, the manipulation, the constant push and pull of their relationship. She had told herself it was worth it for the fleeting moments of peace, for the glimpses of the man Darius used to be. But now, as she stood trembling in their dimly lit living room, she realized there was nothing left worth saving. It started with a text message, a harmless enough exchange between Sophia and Mia about dinner plans in New York. They had been discussing the trip for weeks, though Sophia had carefully avoided mentioning it to Darius. She knew he wouldn't approve, and frankly, she didn't want to deal with the inevitable argument. But when Darius stumbled upon the conversation while scrolling through her phone, something he had taken to doing without asking, it ignited, a firestorm neither of them could contain. "What is this?" Darius demanded, his voice low but laced with venom. He held up her phone, the screen glowing with fragments of their chat. "You're planning a trip to New York? With him?" Sophia froze, her stomach sinking. "Him? What are you talking about? It's just Mia and me catching up with some friends." "Don't lie to me," Darius spat, his face contorted with rage. "I saw the name. That producer guy. You've been talking to him behind my back, haven't you?" Sophia's mind raced. The producer in question was someone Mia had introduced, her toe during a networking event months ago. They'd exchanged polite messages here and there, mostly professional small talk, but nothing more. Still, she knew denying it outright would only make things worse. "It's not what you think," she said cautiously. "He's just a contact, someone who might help me get my foot in the door." "You think I'm stupid?" Darius shouted, slamming the phone onto the coffee table. "Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to keep us afloat? And you're out there throwing yourself at some rich asshole who doesn't give a damn about you?" The accusation stung, not because it was true, but because it revealed the depths of Darius's insecurity. In that moment, Sophia saw him clearly for the first time in years, a broken man clinging to the illusion of control, desperate to hold on to something he feared losing. But clarity brought no comfort. Instead, it filled her with a suffocating mix of pity and anger. "I'm not throwing myself at anyone," she shot back, her voice rising to match his. "And maybe if you spent less time obsessing over what I do, and more time figuring out your own life, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." Her words hit like a punch, and for a brief second, Darius looked as though he might crumble. Then, with terrifying speed, his expression shifted from hurt to fury. Before she could react, he grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You don't get to talk to me like that," he growled, shaking her slightly. "Not after everything I've done for you." Pain shot through Sophia's arm, but it was the look in Darius's eyes that truly terrified her. Gone was the gentle, attentive man she had fallen in love with. In his place stood a stranger, consumed by jealousy and desperation. For the first time, she understood the full extent of the danger she was in. When Darius finally released her, stumbling backward as though horrified by his own actions, Sophia didn't wait for an apology. She grabbed her coat and keys, ignoring his pleas for her to stay. The rain soaked through her clothes as she ran down the street, tears streaming down her face. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat screaming one word: leave. But leaving wasn't as simple as walking out the door. Over the next few days, Sophia discovered just how entangled her life had become with Darius's. Their shared bank accounts were nearly empty, drained by years of overspending and financial mismanagement. Her belongings, clothes, jewelry, even sentimental items like photos, were scattered across their apartment, locked away in drawers and closets she couldn't access without confronting him. Worst of all, her support system felt impossibly distant. Most of her friends lived hours away, and she hadn't confided in anyone about the darker aspects of her relationship. For the first time, Sophia faced the reality of her situation. She was trapped by fear, by dependency, by the toxic web she and Darius had woven together. Every attempt to break free seemed to lead her back to the same painful conclusion, that escaping him would mean starting over from scratch, with nothing but scars to show for the years she'd lost. Yet, amid the despair, a spark of resolve began to flicker as she sat alone in a dingy motel room, clutching a cup of vending machine coffee. Sophia forced herself to confront the choices that had led her here. She thought about the ways she had manipulated Darius, the expectations she had placed on him, the compromises she had made along the way. She realized that while he bore responsibility for his actions, she too had played a role in creating the nightmare they now inhabited. That realization was both devastating and liberating. For so long, Sophia had seen herself as a victim of circumstance, powerless against the forces pulling her life apart. But now she understood that survival meant taking ownership of her mistakes and finding the strength to rebuild, no matter how daunting the task ahead. By the end of the week, Sophia made a decision. She reached out to Mia, who immediately offered her a temporary place to stay. Together, they devised a plan to extract Sophia from the wreckage of her relationship, piece by painful piece. It wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in years, Sophia allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't defined by fear or regret, a future where she could finally breathe freely again. Little did she know, however, that the consequences of her choices and Darius's unraveling were far from over. The days following Sophia's escape from Darius felt like stepping into an alternate reality. The air smelled different, cleaner, freer, as though the weight she had carried for so long had finally lifted. Yet, freedom came with its own set of challenges, ones that Sophia hadn't fully anticipated. Mia welcomed her into her small but cozy apartment in West Hollywood, offering not just a roof over her head, but also a listening ear and unwavering support. For the first time in months, Sophia slept soundly, free from the fear of raised voices or sudden outbursts. But waking life was far more complicated. Mia helped Sophia navigate the practicalities of starting over. They spent hours combing through bank statements, trying to salvage what little remained of Sophia's finances. What they uncovered shocked them both. Years of reckless spending on luxury items, coupled with mounting debt from credit cards Sophia hadn't even realized were maxed out. Darius's financial contributions, while generous at times, had been sporadic and unsustainable, a patchwork solution that masked deeper problems rather than solving them. As Sophia sifted through the wreckage of their shared life, she couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. She had always blamed Darius for their financial instability, painting him as the irresponsible one who couldn't keep up with her aspirations. But now, staring at the evidence laid bare before her, she saw how her own desires had fueled the chaos. Every designer handbag, every expensive dinner, every impulsive purchase had been a band-aid over a wound neither of them knew how to heal. Determined to move forward, Sophia took a job at a local cafe near Mia's apartment. It wasn't glamorous work, far removed from the world of high fashion she had once dreamed of, but it paid the bills and gave her a sense of purpose. Serving lattes and wiping down tables, she found solace in the simplicity of routine. The customers came and went, their lives intersecting briefly with hers before disappearing again, leaving no trace behind. In those moments, Sophia envied their anonymity. She wished she could erase the past as easily as chalk marks from a board, but the past refused to stay buried. One afternoon, as Sophia sorted through mail Mia had forwarded to her, she found an envelope addressed in Darius's handwriting. Her stomach churned as she opened it, bracing herself for whatever lay inside. The letter was brief, yet its contents hit her like a punch to the gut. Sophia, I don't know where you are or if you'll ever read this, but I need you to know something. I've made mistakes. So many mistakes. And I'll carry the guilt of hurting you for the rest of my life. But none of this would have happened if you hadn't pushed me to be someone I'm not. You wanted perfection, Sophia, and I tried to give it to you, even when it broke me. Now look at us. Broken beyond repair. They arrested me last week for fraud. Turns out all those freelance gigs I took on, some of them weren't exactly legal. I did it for you, to keep up with your demands, and now I'm paying the price. So tell me, was it worth it? Was any of it worth destroying everything we had? Darius. Sophia dropped the letter onto the counter, her hands trembling. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Anger, guilt, disbelief. How dare he shift the blame onto her after everything he'd done? And yet, his words stung because they contained shards of truth. She had demanded things from him, things he wasn't capable of giving. She had pushed him to chase an impossible dream, one that neither of them truly understood. In doing so, she had become complicit in their downfall. For days, Sophia wrestled with the letter, replaying Darius's accusations in her mind. Was she responsible for his arrest? Had her relentless pursuit of a better life driven him to such extremes? These questions haunted her, gnawing at her conscience until she could barely focus on anything else. Yet, amidst the turmoil, a realization began to take shape. Blaming herself, or Darius, wouldn't change what had happened. The only way forward was to accept responsibility for her role in their shared tragedy and commit to building a future unshackled from the past. With newfound resolve, Sophia decided to turn her pain into something meaningful. Inspired by late-night conversations with Mia, she started journaling about her experiences, the highs and lows of her relationship with Darius, the lessons she had learned, and the steps she was taking to reclaim her life. At first, writing felt cathartic, a way to process emotions too raw to articulate aloud. But as the pages filled, Sophia noticed patterns emerging, themes of manipulation, dependency, and resilience that resonated deeply with her own journey. Encouraged by Mia, Sophia began sharing snippets of her story online, posting anonymously under the pseudonym Rebuilding Me. To her surprise, the response was overwhelming. Women from all walks of life reached out, sharing their own stories of toxic relationships and survival. Some thanked her for putting words to feelings they had struggled to express. Others offered advice or simply expressed solidarity. For the first time, Sophia felt part of a community, one bound not by geography or circumstance, but by shared experiences of struggle and hope. As weeks turned into months, Sophia's confidence grew. She enrolled in a creative writing course at a nearby community college, determined to hone her craft and expand her platform. Her instructor, impressed by her honesty and vulnerability, encouraged her to consider turning her journal entries into a book. The idea terrified her. Exposing her private pain to the world seemed unthinkable, but it also ignited a spark of possibility. What if her story could help others trapped in similar cycles of abuse and self-doubt? What if her scars could become a beacon of hope for someone else? By the end of the year, Sophia had drafted a manuscript tentatively titled Scars and Stardust, Finding Myself After Love Fell Apart. It was raw, imperfect, and deeply personal, a testament to her journey from victimhood to empowerment. Submitting it to publishers felt like leaping off a cliff, but Sophia reminded herself that she had already survived far worse. If nothing else, she owed it to her future self to try. In the quiet moments between drafting chapters and revising paragraphs, Sophia allowed herself to reflect on how far she had come. She still carried the weight of her past, the bruises, both visible and invisible, but she no longer let it define her. Freedom, she realized, wasn't about forgetting or erasing. It was about transforming pain into purpose, loss into growth. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, Sophia faced it with a quiet determination, knowing she had already taken the hardest step, choosing herself. Little did she know, however, that her decision to confront the past would soon force her to face Darius one final time, not as his lover or his victim, but as someone who refused to be silenced any longer. The release of Sophia's book, Scars and Stardust, Finding Myself After Love Fell Apart, marked a turning point in her life, one she hadn't fully anticipated. What began as a deeply personal project became a national sensation almost overnight. The raw honesty of her narrative resonated with readers across the country, sparking conversations about love, abuse, and resilience. Bookstores couldn't keep copies on their shelves, and talk show hosts clamored to have her as a guest. For the first time in years, Sophia felt seen, not as a victim or a survivor, but as someone whose voice mattered. Yet, fame came with its own challenges. As her story gained traction, Sophia found herself thrust into the public eye, scrutinized by both admirers and critics alike. Some praised her courage, others accused her of exploiting her trauma for profit. Social media buzzed, with debates over whether she had done enough to prevent Darius's downward spiral. Amid the noise, Sophia struggled to stay grounded, reminding herself why she had written the book in the first place, not for validation, but to help others break free from cycles of toxicity. One evening, as Sophia scrolled through comments on an interview clip, she stumbled upon a post that made her blood run cold. It was from an anonymous account claiming to be a friend of Darius's, alleging that he had been unfairly scapegoated. She manipulated him just as much as he hurt her, the comment read. Ask yourself, who really destroyed their relationship? Takoin. Accusation lingered in Sophia's mind long after she closed her laptop. She told herself it didn't matter what people thought of her or Darius, but deep down, she knew there was truth in those words. No matter how far she had come, she couldn't escape the knowledge that she, too, had played a role in their unraveling. The realization gnawed at her conscience, urging her to confront the past once and for all. With Mia's encouragement, Sophia decided to file a formal report against Darius for domestic violence. She had hesitated before, fearing retaliation or judgment, but now she understood that silence only perpetuated the cycle of abuse. Armed with medical records documenting her injuries and journal entries detailing years of emotional manipulation, Sophia met with a detective who assured her they would investigate thoroughly. Reliving those memories was excruciating, but each word she spoke felt like shedding another layer of shame. Weeks later, news broke that Darius had been formally charged with assault and financial fraud. His arrest dominated headlines, overshadowing even the success of Sophia's book. Reporters camped outside her apartment, desperate for a statement, but Sophia refused to engage. Instead, she focused on the work that had brought her this far, speaking at support groups, mentoring women rebuilding their lives, and advocating for systemic changes to protect victims of domestic abuse. Her efforts culminated in an invitation to speak at a major conference on gender-based violence. Standing on stage before hundreds of attendees, Sophia recounted her journey without flinching. She spoke of the illusions of love, the insidious nature of control, and the power of reclaiming one's identity. When she concluded by dedicating her speech to every person who has ever felt trapped by someone they loved, the room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that left her breathless. Afterward, as she mingled with attendees, a familiar face appeared in the crowd. It was Mia, holding a bouquet of white roses. "You did it," Mia said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Not just the speech, the whole thing. You've become unstoppable." Sophia smiled, though part of her still wrestled with doubt. Was she truly free? Or was forgiveness, a concept she had grappled with for months, the final piece of her healing journey? That question lingered as she returned home, where she often sat alone on her balcony overlooking the city lights. One night, as she flipped Through old photographs, Sophia paused at a picture of Darius taken during happier times. He looked so different then, so full of hope and promise. She wondered what might have happened if they had chosen differently, if either of them had recognized the warning signs before it was too late. But dwelling on what-ifs wouldn't change the present. All she could do was move forward, carrying the lessons of her past without letting them weigh her down. Months later, Sophia received a letter from Darius's lawyer. Enclosed was a handwritten note from Darius himself, written from prison. Sophia, if you're reading this, I guess I finally ran out of chances. I won't deny what I did. I know I hurt you in ways I can never take back. But I also want you to know that I'm sorry. Not because I think saying it will fix anything, but because I mean it. You deserved better than me, better than us. Maybe someday when I get out, I'll find a way to make amends. Not just to you, but to everyone I let down. Until then, I hope your light keeps shining brighter than ever. Darius. Reading his words, Sophia felt an unexpected pang of sadness. Not for the man he had become, but for the dreams they had both lost along the way. Yet instead of bitterness, she chose compassion. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing his actions. It was about releasing the hold they had on her heart. And so, with quiet resolve, Sophia tucked the letter away, closing the chapter on their shared history. In the years that followed, Sophia continued to build a life rooted in purpose and authenticity. Her memoir inspired countless others to seek help and healing, while her advocacy work led to meaningful policy reforms. Though scars remained, visible reminders of battles fought, they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as testaments to her strength, proof that even in the darkest moments, redemption was possible. As she sat in her garden one spring afternoon, watching sunlight dance through the leaves, Sophia reflected on her journey. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who craved validation and luxury, who mistook control for love, and realized how far she had come. Freedom hadn't been easy, nor had it come without cost, but it had been worth every step. And, in that moment, surrounded by the beauty of new beginnings, Sophia knew she had finally found peace. Not with Darius, but with herself.